The Arizona Territory schoolhouse sits quiet in the desert twilight, but Elizabeth Hartwell cannot find peace. At 32, she has built a careful life teaching the children of Mesa Ridge, keeping her past buried beneath layers of propriety and routine. Her hands tremble as she grades papers by lamplight, trying to forget the dream that has haunted her for 3 nights running. Outside her window, a shadow moves through the sagebrush. The Apache warrior steps into the moonlight with the silent grace of his people, his dark eyes holding secrets that mirror her own. When he speaks, his voice carries across the desert air like a prayer she thought she had forgotten. Last night you cried my name. Elizabeth's face drains of color as memories she has fought to suppress come flooding back. But how can this stranger know what even she has tried to forget? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Elizabeth's breath catches in her throat as she stares through the window glass, her reflection ghost-like against the darkness beyond. The Apache warrior stands motionless in the silver moonlight, his presence both impossible and undeniable. 3 years of careful construction, 3 years of building a respectable life in Mesa Ridge, and now this specter from her buried past appears like a judgment she cannot escape. Her fingers instinctively reach for the silver locket hidden beneath the high collar of her dark blue dress. The weight of it against her skin has been both comfort and torment, a reminder of what she lost and what she chose to abandon. Inside the delicate silver oval lies a photograph she has not dared to look at in months, pressed against a small piece of Apache turquoise that catches the light like captured sky. The weathered diary tucked beneath her mattress calls to her now with urgent whispers. Those pressed wildflowers between its pages, carefully preserved specimens that she claimed were for her students' botanical studies, tell a different story entirely. Each bloom marks a memory she has tried to forget. Desert marigolds that grew wild near the hidden canyon, purple lupine that colored the hills where they once walked together, tiny white evening primroses that opened only in moonlight. She forces herself to step back from the window, to turn away from the figure that waits with infinite patience in the darkness. But her movements feel mechanical, disconnected from the storm of emotions raging within her chest. The schoolhouse around her, with its neat rows of wooden desks and carefully arranged teaching materials, suddenly feels like a prison of her own construction. Mesa Ridge had seemed like salvation when she arrived 3 years ago, a fresh start in a territory where questions about one's past were considered impolite and often dangerous. The position as schoolmistress offered exactly what she needed: respectability, purpose, and most importantly, distance from the scandal that had driven her from her previous life. The townspeople welcomed her with the reserved politeness that frontier communities extended to educated women, willing to civilize their children. Miss Patterson, the banker's wife, and self-appointed guardian of Mesa Ridge's moral standards, had made it clear from Elizabeth's first day that proper behavior was expected and closely monitored. The older woman's sharp eyes missed nothing, from the precise arrangement of Elizabeth's auburn hair to the modest cut of her dresses. Any deviation from accepted norms would be noted, discussed, and ultimately judged by the tight circle of respectable women who determined social standing in the small community. Samuel Hayes had been among the first to welcome her, his kind eyes and gentle manner offering friendship without the calculating assessment she had grown to expect from men. The territory's only physician carried himself with the quiet authority of someone accustomed to making life and death decisions, but his interest in Elizabeth seemed motivated by genuine affection rather than mere availability. In recent months, his visits to check on her health had become more frequent, his conversations more personal, his intentions increasingly clear. Elizabeth sinks into the wooden chair behind her desk, her hands pressing flat against the surface her grandfather crafted decades ago back in Ohio. The familiar texture of worn wood usually brings comfort, but tonight it feels like touching the bars of a cage. Every choice she has made since arriving in Mesa Ridge has been calculated to maintain the careful fiction of her respectability. She attends church services with appropriate devotion, participates in ladies' auxiliary meetings with proper enthusiasm, and maintains the educational standards that make her valuable to the community. But beneath the surface of this constructed life, the truth writhes like a living thing demanding acknowledgement. The dreams that have haunted her for 3 nights running are not products of an anxious imagination or guilty conscience. They are memories breaking through the barriers she has spent 3 years building, memories of a love so forbidden and dangerous that acknowledging it could cost her everything she has worked to achieve. The Apache warrior outside her window is not a stranger, despite her desperate wish that he could be. She knows the way he moves with fluid grace across the desert landscape, knows the sound of his voice speaking her name in the darkness, knows the touch of his hands and the warmth of his skin against her. Joseph Crow Feather, the man she knew by his Apache name that she still whispers in her dreams, the man who taught her that love could transcend the boundaries of race and culture if 2 hearts were brave enough to claim it. Through the window she can see him turn his face toward the schoolhouse, toward her. Even across the distance, she feels the weight of his gaze like a physical touch. He knows she is watching, knows she recognizes him, despite the years that have passed and the different worlds they now inhabit. The connection between them exists beyond time and circumstance, beyond the fear and shame that drove her to flee from everything they had built together. Elizabeth closes her eyes and allows herself, for just a moment, to remember the sound of her own voice crying his name in passion and desperation. The memory brings both ecstasy and agony, the sweet torture of remembering a love that existed outside the boundaries of acceptable society. She had been a different woman then, brave enough to follow her heart into territory that respectable people never dared to explore. Now, watching his silhouette against the star-filled sky, she realizes that all her careful construction of respectability cannot erase what they share. The love that drove her away still burns within her chest, as dangerous and consuming as ever. Joseph Crow Feather has found her, and with his appearance, the reckoning she has dreaded and longed for in equal measure has finally begun. In the hills above Mesa Ridge, Joseph Crow Feather stands with the patience his people have learned through centuries of survival. The sacred eagle feather bound with leather cord and blessed herbs hangs from his belt, a tangible connection to the spiritual world that guides his action. Among his people he is known as a bridge walker, one who moves between the world of the living and the realm of spirits, between the old ways and the new realities that threaten to consume everything sacred. The feather had belonged to his grandfather, a medicine man who foresaw the coming changes and prepared Joseph for a life lived between worlds. When the soldiers came to take Apache children to the white man's schools, his grandfather had whispered urgent instructions. Learn their ways, but never forget your own. Speak their language, but remember the songs of your ancestors. Walk in their world, but keep your feet on sacred ground. For 15 years, Joseph had followed that guidance through the halls of the Carlisle Industrial School in Pennsylvania, where Apache boys were stripped of their names, their language, and their connection to everything that made them whole. He became Joseph to his teachers and fellow students, but in his heart he remained Knowledge, the one who heals, the one who remembers. The white man's education filled his mind with their knowledge, while his grandfather's teachings preserved his soul. Now, at 29, he serves his people as both medicine man and negotiator, using the white man's language and customs to protect what remains of Apache freedom. The leather-bound feather reminds him that every action must serve the greater purpose of survival, that individual desires must bow to the needs of the people. But standing in the moonlight outside Elizabeth's window, Joseph feels the weight of his own human heart, pulling against the duties that define him. 3 years of searching had brought him to this moment. 3 years of following rumors and whispered conversations, of visiting every settlement and town where a woman matching her description might have found refuge. His dreams had guided him as much as practical investigation. Visions of a woman with hair like autumn fire, who called his name in a voice that carried both love and desperation. The Apache understand dreams as messages from the spirit world, windows into truth that the waking mind cannot grasp. Joseph's dreams of Elizabeth had come with increasing frequency over the past months, each vision more vivid and urgent than the last. He had seen her standing before a room full of children, had watched her trace letters on a wooden board, had felt her tears falling like rain on drought-stricken earth. His position among his people made this search both possible and dangerous. As a respected medicine man and skilled negotiator, he traveled freely between Apache settlements and white communities, serving as an intermediary when conflicts arose. The territorial authorities tolerated his presence because his interventions had prevented several potentially devastating confrontations. But seeking out a white woman for personal reasons crossed boundaries that could tim everything he had worked to build. The memory of her departure still burned in his chest like an unhealed wound. Elizabeth had vanished in the night without explanation or farewell, leaving behind only the faint scent of her hair on his pillow and a silence that echoed through his dreams. For months, he had convinced himself that she would return, that whatever force had driven her away would release its hold and allow her to come back to him. But seasons passed, and the silence stretched into years. His people had watched his grief with the understanding that comes from a culture acquainted with loss. They offered neither judgment nor false comfort, knowing that some wounds heal only through time and acceptance. But they also recognized that Joseph's pain served a purpose in his work as a healer, that his own suffering allowed him to understand the depth of others' anguish. The white community where they had met knew nothing of their relationship, nothing of the nights when Elizabeth would slip away from her teaching duties to meet him in the hidden canyon where ancient petroglyphs told stories of love that transcended tribal boundaries. To them, she was simply the dedicated schoolmistress who showed unusual interest in Apache culture and language. Her ability to speak basic Apache and her respectful manner toward his people had earned their trust, but no one suspected the depth of connection that existed between the teacher and the medicine man, who occasionally visited to share stories with the children. Standing now in the desert night, Joseph can feel Elizabeth's presence as surely as he feels the pulse of his own blood. The spiritual connection that drew them together 3 years ago remains unbroken, a thread of light that neither time nor distance could sever. His grandfather had taught him that such connections exist beyond the physical world, that two spirits meant to walk together will find each other across any distance. But Joseph also understands the danger his presence brings to Elizabeth's carefully constructed new life. White society shows no mercy to women who violate the boundaries of acceptable behavior, and a relationship with an Apache man represents the ultimate transgression. Her flight 3 years ago had likely been motivated by threats and social pressure that he could only imagine. Now, by appearing in Mesa Ridge, he risks destroying whatever safety and respectability she has managed to build. Yet the dreams have made it clear that she needs him, that some part of her soul remains incomplete without the connection they share. The spirits do not send visions without purpose, and Joseph has learned to trust their guidance even when it leads into dangerous territory. His love for Elizabeth burns as fiercely as ever, but it now carries the wisdom of experience and the understanding that true love sometimes requires sacrifice rather than possession. Tomorrow he will find a way to speak with her, to learn why she left and what has brought such sorrow to her dreams. Tonight he stands vigil under the stars, offering prayers to his ancestors for guidance and strength. The sacred eagle feather stirs in the night breeze, carrying his words to the spirit world where all healing begins. The next morning brings no peace to Elizabeth's troubled mind. She moves through her morning routine with mechanical precision, braiding her hair with the same careful attention to propriety that has defined her life in Mesa Ridge. But her hands shake as she pins the auburn coils into place, and the face that stares back from her small mirror shows the toll of a sleepless night spent wrestling with memories she thought safely buried. Hidden beneath her teaching materials, wrapped in faded blue silk that once belonged to her grandmother, lies the letter she discovered last night. The faded letter with its broken wax seal represents everything she has tried to forget, written in handwriting she would recognize anywhere despite the years that have passed. The ink has faded to sepia brown, but the words remain as vivid as the day they were written, each line a testament to a love that defied every convention of their separate worlds. My beloved Elizabeth, the letter begins in Joseph's careful script, learned in the white man's schools, but infused with the poetry of his Apache heritage. The desert blooms with your memory, and every sunset carries the promise of your return. I understand the forces that have driven you away, but know that my love transcends any boundaries that others might draw between us. You are written in my heart, in letters that no earthly power can erase. She had thought this letter destroyed years ago, burned with all the other evidence of their forbidden relationship, when terror and social pressure had finally driven her to flee. Yet here it lies, somehow preserved despite her desperate attempts to erase every trace of what they shared. Perhaps she had hidden it so deeply that even she had forgotten its existence, or perhaps, in her heart, she had never truly wanted to let it go. The schoolhouse door opens with its familiar creak as Elizabeth arrives for another day of teaching. The children of Mesa Ridge greet her with the casual affection they show toward adults who treat them with respect and kindness. Little Sarah Patterson, the banker's daughter, shows off her improved penmanship, while Tommy Morrison, the son of a local rancher, proudly recites the arithmetic table she has drilled into his reluctant mind. But Elizabeth's attention keeps drifting to the windows that frame the desert landscape beyond the settlement. Somewhere out there, Joseph waits for the opportunity to approach her, to demand answers to questions she has spent 3 years avoiding. The thought fills her with equal parts terror and anticipation, the complex emotions of a woman who has never stopped loving the man she was forced to abandon. Samuel Hayes arrives during the morning recess, ostensibly to check on young Billy Henderson, who had suffered a fever the previous week. But Elizabeth recognizes the subtle signs of a man working up courage for a significant conversation. His visits have become more frequent in recent months, his manner more personal, his questions more probing about her past and her plans for the future. Elizabeth, I hope you don't mind my saying so, but you look tired this morning, Hayes observes with the gentle concern that has made him beloved throughout the territory. Are you feeling unwell? The desert climate can be challenging for those not born to it. The kindness in his voice brings tears to Elizabeth's eyes, though she quickly turns away to hide her emotional state. Samuel Hayes represents everything she thought she wanted when she fled to Mesa Ridge: safety, respectability, a future free from the complications that had nearly destroyed her previous life. He is a good man who would treat her with respect and provide the security that frontier life demands. Yet standing in his presence, she feels nothing but the hollow echo of what real passion once felt like. I'm fine, Samuel, she manages, using his given name with the familiarity that has developed between them over the month. Perhaps I've been staying up too late preparing lessons. The children are advancing so quickly, and I want to ensure they're ready for whatever challenges await them. Dr. Hayes nods with understanding, but Elizabeth can see the deeper concern in his eyes. As a physician, he has learned to read the subtle signs of distress that others might miss. Her pallor, the slight tremor in her hands, the way her gaze keeps drifting toward the desert beyond the windows, all suggest someone wrestling with more than simple fatigue. Elizabeth, I've been meaning to speak with you about a matter of some importance, he begins, the formal tone indicating that this conversation will venture into territory they have carefully avoided until now. My practice has grown to the point where I'm considering taking on an associate, perhaps a young doctor, fresh from medical school back east. The territory is growing, and the need for medical services continues to expand. She listens with part of her attention, while the rest remains focused on the landscape outside, searching for any sign of the man whose presence has shattered the careful equilibrium of her constructed life. What I'm trying to say, Hayes continues with the hesitant manner of a man unaccustomed to discussing personal matters, is that I find myself thinking more about the future, about building something permanent rather than simply responding to immediate needs. A man in my position benefits from companionship, from the stability that comes with marriage to a woman of intelligence and character. The proposal, though gently delivered, strikes Elizabeth like a physical blow. 3 years of careful behavior and proper conduct have led inevitably to this moment, when the respectable life she has constructed demands its price in the form of permanent commitment to a future that feels like death to her awakened heart. The arrival of Captain Bradley Morrison that afternoon transforms the atmosphere of Mesa Ridge from peaceful routine to tense vigilance. The territorial militia commander rides into town at the head of a dust-covered patrol, their presence announcing trouble before any words are spoken. Morrison's weathered face carries the permanent scowl of a man who sees enemies in every shadow, and his reputation for harsh dealing with Apache tribes has made him both feared and respected throughout the territory. Elizabeth watches from her schoolhouse window as the captain dismounts in front of the saloon, his military bearing commanding immediate attention from the assembled townspeople. Even from a distance she can see the military dispatch clutched in his gloved hand, the official seal and urgent formatting that suggests news of territorial importance. The sight of Morrison fills Elizabeth with dread that goes beyond the general unease his presence brings to any community. She has heard stories of his methods, his belief that the only solution to the Apache problem involves complete subjugation or elimination. The very existence of men like Joseph Crow Feather represents a challenge to Morrison's worldview, and she knows that any Apache found near white settlements faces immediate suspicion and potential violence. The captain's voice carries across the dusty street as he addresses the gathered crowd, his words sharp with military authority and barely contained anger. "Gentlemen, I bring word from territorial headquarters regarding increased Apache activity in this region. Intelligence reports suggest that several bands have been moving through the area, possibly in preparation for coordinated attacks on settlements." Elizabeth's blood runs cold as she realizes the implications of Morrison's announcement. Joseph's presence in the area, innocent though it may be, could easily be misinterpreted as part of whatever threat the captain believes he has identified. The timing of his arrival in Mesa Ridge, coinciding with Morrison's patrol, seems like cruel fate conspiring against them. The military dispatch in Morrison's hand bears the territorial seal and urgent markings that suggest information of the highest importance. Such documents typically contain specific intelligence about Apache movements, names of suspected leaders, and authorization for military action deemed necessary to protect white settlers. Elizabeth has seen similar dispatches before during her previous teaching assignment, and she knows they often serve as death warrants for any Apache unfortunate enough to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. "I want every man in this town to remain vigilant," Morrison continues, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to absolute obedience. "Any suspicious activity, any sighting of Apache warriors in the vicinity, must be reported immediately to my command. We have reason to believe that hostile elements are using peaceful contact as cover for reconnaissance and planning." The captain's words strike Elizabeth with particular force because she knows they describe exactly the kind of dangerous position Joseph has placed himself in by coming to Mesa Ridge. His presence near the settlement, however innocent his motivations, will be interpreted through the lens of military suspicion and racial prejudice that defines territorial policy toward all Apache people. Hayes appears at Elizabeth's side, drawn by the commotion in the street and concerned by her obvious distress. "Elizabeth, you look as though you've seen a ghost. Surely Captain Morrison's news, while concerning, doesn't warrant such alarm." Mesa Ridge has always maintained peaceful relations with the local Apache bands. His words, meant to provide comfort, only deepen Elizabeth's anguish because she knows that peaceful relations mean nothing to men like Morrison, who see Apache culture itself as inherently hostile to white civilization. The captain's reputation for preemptive strikes and aggressive patrolling has led to numerous incidents where innocent Apache families have paid the price for his paranoia. The territorial government has authorized expanded patrols and increased military presence throughout this region. Morrison announces to the crowd, "Any Apache found within 10 miles of white settlements without proper authorization will be considered hostile and dealt with accordingly." The arbitrary nature of Morrison's decree fills Elizabeth with terror for Joseph's safety. The hidden canyon where they once met lies barely 5 miles from Mesa Ridge, well within the captain's newly declared exclusion zone. If Joseph attempts to approach her through their old meeting place, he will be walking directly into a trap that could cost him his life. Elizabeth excuses herself from Dr. Hayes and retreats into the schoolhouse, her mind racing with the impossibility of warning Joseph about the new danger. She has no way to communicate with him, no means of reaching the places where he might be waiting for an opportunity to speak with her. The isolation that has protected her secret for 3 years now threatens to become the instrument of Joseph's destruction. The afternoon passes in a haze of anxiety and mounting dread, as Elizabeth tries to maintain her teaching duties while her thoughts remain focused on the danger closing around the man she has never stopped loving. The children sense her distraction and respond with the restless energy that always emerges when adult attention wavers. Their innocent chatter about soldiers and Apache raids only intensifies her awareness of how precarious the situation has become. As evening approaches and the children depart for their homes, Elizabeth finds herself alone with the terrible knowledge that Joseph may already be moving toward a confrontation with Morrison's patrol. The irony is devastating. His search for her, motivated by love and the spiritual conviction that they belong together, may lead directly to his death at the hands of men who see him as nothing more than another obstacle to white expansion into Apache territory. Dawn breaks across the desert with the subtle beauty that has sustained Elizabeth through 3 years of exile, but this morning the familiar landscape feels transformed by danger and possibility. Despite every rational argument against such reckless action, she finds herself drawn toward the hidden canyon where she and Joseph once met in secret, compelled by an inexplicable certainty that he waits for her there. The carved wooden horse sits in her trembling palm as she prepares to leave the schoolhouse, its smooth surface worn by countless hours of anxious handling. Joseph had crafted it during the early days of their courtship, whittling the miniature sculpture during long evenings when words seemed inadequate to express the depth of his feelings. The horse represents freedom in Apache culture, the wild spirit that refuses to be contained or broken by external force. For the woman whose spirit runs free across the desert, he had whispered when presenting the gift, his dark eyes reflecting firelight and infinite tenderness. Elizabeth had treasured the small carving, keeping it close during their separation as a tangible reminder of love that transcended cultural boundaries. The wooden horse had traveled with her to Mesa Ridge, hidden among her most precious possessions, a secret talisman that connected her to the part of herself she had been forced to abandon. The journey to the canyon requires careful navigation through terrain that shows increasing signs of military activity. Horse tracks and boot prints in the sandy soil tell the story of Morrison's patrols, their systematic search patterns designed to flush out any Apache presence in the area. Elizabeth moves with the stealth that Joseph once taught her, using natural cover and avoiding ridgelines where her silhouette might be visible from a distance. The hidden canyon lies nestled between red sandstone walls that have sheltered secrets for countless generations. Ancient petroglyphs cover the rock surfaces, their mysterious symbols speaking to the timeless nature of human connection and spiritual seeking. Water seeps from underground springs to create a small oasis of green vegetation, cottonwood trees, providing shade and the sound of their leaves rustling in the morning breeze. Joseph waits where she knew he would be, seated cross-legged on the flat stone where they once shared meals and dreams of a future that seemed possible in their private sanctuary. 3 years have added lines to his face and gray streaks to his black hair, but his presence still fills the canyon with the quiet authority that first drew her to him. He wears traditional Apache clothing rather than the white man's garments he dons for official business, and the sight of him, in his true cultural identity, brings tears to Elizabeth's eyes. "I wondered if you would come," he says softly, his voice carrying the same gentle strength she remembers from their stolen moments together. "The dreams told me you would, but dreams sometimes lie to hearts that want too desperately to believe." Elizabeth approaches slowly, each step carrying the weight of 3 years of separation and the terror of the danger his presence represents. "Joseph, you shouldn't be here. Captain Morrison has declared this entire area off limits to your people. If his patrols find you..." "I know about the soldier captain and his threats," Joseph replies with calm acceptance. "But I also know that some things matter more than personal safety. The spirits sent me visions of your tears, Elizabeth. They showed me your sorrow calling across the desert night after night." The simple acknowledgement of her hidden pain breaks through the careful barriers Elizabeth has maintained for 3 years. She sinks to her knees beside the stone, her composure finally cracking under the weight of suppressed emotion and present fear. "I never stopped thinking about you," she whispers, the admission torn from somewhere deep in her chest. "I tried to forget, tried to build a life where you couldn't follow, but you were always there in my dreams, in every sunset, in every moment of silence." Joseph reaches out to touch her face with infinite gentleness, his calloused fingers tracing the path of tears she didn't realize were falling. "Why did you leave without word? Why did you disappear into the night as though our love meant nothing?" The question she has dreaded for 3 years hangs between them in the desert air, demanding an answer that will either heal the wounds of their separation or deepen them beyond repair. Elizabeth looks into his dark eyes and sees the pain her departure caused, the bewilderment and sense of betrayal that her silence created. "Because they were going to kill you," she says simply, the truth finally escaping after years of careful containment. "The cavalry captain who preceded Morrison, Captain Stewart, discovered our relationship. He came to me with photographs, with witnesses, with threats that would have destroyed us both. But his greatest threat was against you." Joseph's expression hardens as he processes the implications of her revelation. "What kind of threats?" He said that Apache men who corrupted white women were dealt with according to military justice, that accidents happened during patrol actions, that bodies disappeared in the desert with no questions asked. He gave me 24 hours to leave the territory, or you would die in what appeared to be a routine engagement with hostile forces. The terrible logic of her choice becomes clear as Elizabeth speaks the words she has carried in silence for 3 years. Her flight had not been abandonment, but sacrifice, a desperate attempt to save the man she loved from the violence that her love had brought into his life. Joseph's hands tremble as he reaches into the leather pouch at his side, withdrawing a delicate chain of silver that catches the morning light like captured starfire. Suspended from the chain is a thin band of precious metal, its surface engraved with symbols that blend Apache spiritual markings with the simple elegance of a traditional wedding ring. Elizabeth's breath catches in her throat as she recognizes the artifact that represents the most dangerous secret they share. "I have carried this every day since you left," Joseph says softly, the wedding ring gleaming between his fingers like a tangible prayer. "The marriage ceremony we shared in the old way, before the sacred fire and witnessed by the spirits of my ancestors. In the eyes of my people, you are still my wife. In the eyes of the Creator, our bond remains unbroken." The memory floods back with devastating clarity, the hidden ceremony performed by Joseph's grandfather in the heart of Apache territory, where ancient traditions still held power despite the encroaching influence of white civilization. Elizabeth had worn traditional Apache wedding garments, her hair braided with sacred herbs, while the old medicine man spoke words that bound their spirits together in the sight of forces more powerful than human law. No white authority would recognize the validity of their union, performed according to customs they considered primitive superstition. But Elizabeth has never forgotten the profound sense of belonging she felt when Joseph placed the ring on her finger while firelight danced across the canyon walls. The ceremony had made her part of something larger than herself, connected to spiritual traditions that stretched back through generations of Apache wisdom. The ring was my grandmother's, Joseph continues, his voice thick with emotion. She wore it during the years when our people lived free, on the land, before the soldiers came with their reservations and their promises that turned to dust. When I told her of my love for you, she said that true marriage transcends the boundaries that fearful people draw between different worlds. Elizabeth reaches out with trembling fingers to touch the ring, feeling the weight of silver and memory that represents a love too dangerous to acknowledge yet too powerful to deny. The engraved symbols tell the story of their relationship. The eagle representing Joseph's spiritual authority, the desert rose symbolizing Elizabeth's beauty that bloomed in harsh terrain, the intertwined circles speaking to their eternal connection. I wore it every day for 6 months. After our ceremony, Elizabeth whispers, remembering the joy of secretly touching the ring beneath her modest teacher's clothing. But when Captain Stewart discovered our relationship, I had to hide it away. Even possessing such a thing would have been evidence of my transgression. The word tastes bitter in her mouth because it reduces the most sacred experience of her life to something shameful and forbidden. White society's inability to recognize the legitimacy of their Apache marriage had transformed their love from blessed union to criminal act, from spiritual bond to social scandal. Joseph closes his eyes and speaks words that carry the authority of Apache law and tradition. I have never taken another wife, Elizabeth. In my heart and in the understanding of my people, our marriage continues despite the years of separation. The ring I offer now is the same promise I made 3 years ago, but deepened by the knowledge of what our love has cost us both. The canyon around them seems to hold its breath as Elizabeth faces the choice that will determine the course of the rest of her life. The Apache wedding ring represents not just personal happiness, but a return to spiritual authenticity that her respectable life in Mesa Ridge has never provided. Yet accepting the ring means acknowledging a relationship that could cost Joseph his life and herself everything she has worked to build. The ceremony, Elizabeth says slowly, her voice barely audible above the sound of water flowing through the canyon. Your grandfather spoke of the blood oath, the sharing of life force that cannot be broken by earthly powers. Do you remember his words? Joseph nods with solemn understanding. He said that 2 spirits joined in sacred marriage become one being living in 2 bodies. That separation brings pain because it divides what the Creator meant to be whole. The blood we shared that night flows still in both our veins, carrying our commitment across any distance. The memory of that mysterious ritual still sends shivers through Elizabeth's body. The aged medicine man had made small cuts on their palms, allowing their blood to mingle while he chanted prayers in the ancient language. The physical sensation had been brief, but the spiritual impact had been profound, as though invisible threads had connected their hearts in ways that transcended ordinary understanding. I felt it, Elizabeth admits, her voice breaking with emotion. Even in Mesa Ridge, even when I tried to forget, I could feel your presence like an echo in my blood. In the quiet moments, in the space between sleeping and waking, I knew you were searching for me. Joseph reaches out to take her left hand, his thumb tracing the pale circle on her ring finger where the Apache wedding band once rested. 3 years of careful concealment have not erased the mark completely, and seeing it brings tears to his eyes. The spirits do not lie, my beloved, he says with quiet conviction. They brought me to you because our story is not finished, because the love that bound us in sacred ceremony cannot be destroyed by the fears and hatred of others. But I will not ask you to choose unless you understand fully what that choice means. Elizabeth looks into his face and sees not just the man she has loved beyond reason, but the representative of an entire world that white society is working systematically to destroy. Choosing Joseph means choosing the Apache way of life, accepting the spiritual beliefs and cultural practices that define his identity. It means abandoning the safety of respectability for the dangerous authenticity of a love that bridges 2 worlds. The blood-stained cavalry jacket lies crumpled in the corner of Elizabeth's memory like a monument to violence and the night that changed everything. Even now, 3 years later, she can smell the metallic scent of blood mixed with dust and gunpowder, can hear the screams of women and children caught in the crossfire of Captain Stewart's brutal raid on Joseph's peaceful band. That terrible night had begun like so many others, with Elizabeth slipping away from her teaching quarters to meet Joseph at their secret place. The spring evening carried the sweet scent of desert blooms and the promise of hours spent in each other's arms, away from the prying eyes and judgmental whispers that would have destroyed them both. She had been thinking about their future, about the possibility of leaving the territory together to find some place where their love might exist without persecution. The sound of approaching horses had shattered the desert silence like thunder breaking over peaceful valleys. Joseph had immediately recognized the danger, his warrior instincts honed by years of avoiding military patrols and territorial militias. He had pushed Elizabeth behind a cluster of boulders, his body shielding her from the chaos about to unfold. Captain Stewart's cavalry had struck the Apache camp with devastating efficiency, their attack motivated by reports of stolen cattle that later proved to be unfounded. But truth mattered little when military careers could be advanced through decisive action against hostile Indians. The blue-uniformed soldiers had swept through the camp like a destroying wind, their carbines spitting fire and death into the darkness. Elizabeth had watched in horror as families fled their burning lodges, as children scattered like frightened rabbits, while their parents tried desperately to protect them. The blood-stained jacket that would haunt her dreams belonged to a young cavalry lieutenant who fell near their hiding place, his chest torn open by an Apache arrow, fired in desperate defense of home and family. Joseph had torn himself away from Elizabeth's side to help evacuate the wounded, his medicine man training overriding every instinct for self-preservation. She had watched him carry an injured child to safety while bullets whistled around his head, had seen him drag an elderly woman away from her burning lodge while soldiers pursued them into the darkness. The raid had lasted less than an hour, but its aftermath stretched across months of investigation, accusation, and mounting pressure on anyone suspected of sympathizing with Apache interests. Captain Stewart had used the attack to justify his harsh policies, while quietly conducting his own investigation into rumors of inappropriate relationships between white women and Apache men. Elizabeth's scream when she saw Joseph fall beneath a cavalry saber had given them away. The sound tore from her throat without conscious thought, a cry of anguish that revealed the depth of her emotional investment in the wounded Apache warrior. In that moment of terror and heartbreak, 3 years of careful secrecy had been destroyed by an involuntary expression of love. Stewart had found them there at dawn, Elizabeth cradling Joseph's unconscious form while his blood soaked into her dress. The sight of a respectable white schoolteacher in intimate contact with an Apache warrior had confirmed the captain's worst suspicions about the corrupting influence of savage culture on civilized women. "This is what comes of allowing bleeding hearts to coddle these animals," Stewart had said, his voice cold with disgust. "They mistake kindness for weakness and use it to corrupt our own women against their own race." The journey back to the settlement had been a nightmare of shame and fear, as Elizabeth faced the inevitable consequences of exposure. Stewart's men had bound Joseph like a dangerous criminal despite his obvious need for medical attention, their treatment of him calculated to demonstrate what happened to Apache men who dared to approach white women. But the captain's real cruelty had been reserved for Elizabeth herself. In the privacy of his temporary headquarters, he had laid out the evidence of her relationship with methodical precision. Witness statements from soldiers who had observed her secret meetings, photographs taken by military scouts documenting her presence in Apache territory, testimony from townspeople who had noticed her unusual interest in Apache culture and language. "You have a choice, Miss Hartwell," Stewart had said with the quiet authority of a man accustomed to destroying lives in service of what he considered higher purpose. "You can leave this territory within 24 hours and never return, or you can face formal charges for treason and moral corruption. Your Apache lover will be tried for kidnapping and assault on a white woman, crimes that carry a mandatory death sentence. The ultimatum had been designed to ensure Elizabeth's cooperation while eliminating the evidence of Stuart's own brutal overreach. Her testimony about the unprovoked nature of the cavalry raid could have ended his career, but her compromised moral position made her unable to speak without destroying herself. Elizabeth had chosen Joseph's life over her own happiness, accepting exile and silence as the price of keeping him alive. But even 3 years later, the memory of that blood-stained cavalry jacket serves as a reminder that violence lurks just beneath the surface of every interaction between her people and his, that their love exists in the shadow of forces dedicated to its destruction. The wanted poster arrives in Mesa Ridge on a dust-covered dispatch rider's horse, its stark black ink carrying news that transforms Elizabeth's worst fears into present reality. Captain Morrison posts the document on the saloon door with grim satisfaction, its bold lettering visible to anyone passing through the town's main thoroughfare. The crude sketch shows Joseph's face rendered in harsh lines that emphasize the angular features white artists used to make Apache men appear more savage and threatening than they actually are. Wanted for questioning, Joseph Crow Feather, Apache warrior, suspected of involvement in recent raids on territorial settlements. Armed and extremely dangerous. Reward of $500 for information leading to capture. Contact Captain B. Morrison, Territorial Militia Command. Elizabeth stares at the poster through her schoolhouse window, her heart pounding with terror at seeing Joseph's likeness displayed like a common criminal. The reward amount is substantial enough to motivate every desperate man in the territory to join the hunt, transforming her beloved into prey for bounty hunters who care nothing about truth or justice. Samuel Hayes approaches the schoolhouse during the afternoon recess, his kind face troubled by the morning's developments and their implications for community safety. His medical bag carries the supplies needed to treat injuries, but Elizabeth fears that Joseph's capture would result in wounds that no earthly physician could heal. Elizabeth, I wanted to check on you after this disturbing news about Apache raiders in the area, Dr. Hayes says with gentle concern. Captain Morrison's poster suggests the situation is more serious than we initially understood. Perhaps it would be wise for you to stay with Mrs. Patterson until the military resolves this matter. The suggestion fills Elizabeth with both gratitude for his protective concern and anguish at the impossibility of accepting help without revealing the truth. Samuel Hayes represents everything admirable about frontier civilization: compassion, education, dedication to healing rather than destroying. But his world and Joseph's exist in such fundamental opposition that bridging them seems impossible. Samuel, what do you know about Apache culture beyond what the military tells us? Elizabeth asks, surprising herself with the directness of her question. Have you ever treated Apache patients, observed their customs and beliefs? Hayes pauses to consider his answer, his scientific training encouraging careful observation rather than prejudicial assumption. I've had limited medical contact with Apache people over the years. When children or elders require treatment that their own medicine cannot provide, they sometimes seek help from white physicians. What I've observed suggests a complex culture with sophisticated understanding of herbal medicine and spiritual healing. His response reveals the kind of open-minded intelligence that first attracted Elizabeth to him, but it also highlights the vast distance between intellectual appreciation and the profound personal commitment that true love demands. Samuel Hayes can respect Apache culture as an abstract concept, but he cannot love an Apache man or accept the spiritual beliefs that define Joseph's identity. Do you think, Elizabeth continues carefully, that individual Apache people might be capable of peaceful intentions, even when military authorities assume hostile motives? Certainly, Dr. Hayes replies with conviction. I've known Apache individuals who demonstrated remarkable character and wisdom, but Elizabeth, the current situation involves specific intelligence about organized raids. Even if most Apache people desire peace, that doesn't mean all of them share those intentions. The conversation illustrates the impossible position Elizabeth occupies, knowing Joseph's true character, while being unable to defend him without revealing their relationship. She watches through the window as townspeople gather around Morrison's poster, their voices carrying speculation about Apache threats and the need for decisive military action. Miss Patterson emerges from her husband's bank building with the purposeful stride of a woman preparing to organize community response to crisis. Her sharp eyes scan the gathered crowd before fixing on the schoolhouse, and Elizabeth recognizes the calculating look that suggests unwelcome questions and intrusive investigations. Patterson calls across the dusty street, her voice carrying the authority of social position and moral certainty. I believe it would be appropriate for you to dismiss the children early today and join the ladies' auxiliary meeting. We need to discuss proper security measures while these savage raiders threaten our community. The casual use of the word savage to describe Joseph's people strikes Elizabeth like a physical blow, but she maintains her composure while agreeing to attend the meeting. The ladies' auxiliary represents the collective moral authority of Mesa Ridge's respectable women, and their discussions often determine community attitudes toward any controversial issue. The meeting that afternoon reveals the depth of fear and prejudice that Captain Morrison's announcement has awakened in the supposedly civilized hearts of Elizabeth's neighbors. Woman after woman shares stories of Apache atrocities, most of them second-hand accounts that grow more dramatic with each telling. The wanted poster transforms from military document to community obsession as residents convince themselves that Joseph Crow Feather personally threatens their safety. I've heard that this particular Apache has been seen near the settlement, whispers Margaret Thompson, the mercantile owner's wife. My husband says he matches the description of a warrior spotted by Tom Bradley while he was checking his property line. Elizabeth's blood runs cold at the realization that Joseph's presence has already been noted by observant neighbors. Tom Bradley's farm borders the desert where Joseph might naturally travel, and his sighting report could provide Captain Morrison with the intelligence needed to organize a manhunt. We must be vigilant about any unusual behavior among our own people, Mrs. Patterson declares with ominous authority. Apache raiders often use sympathizers to gather information about settlement defenses and routine. Anyone showing suspicious interest in Apache culture or defending their customs should be watched carefully. The thinly veiled warning seems directed specifically at Elizabeth, whose teaching methods have included lessons about Apache history and customs that now appear dangerously sympathetic to suspicious minds. 3 years of careful behavior have not been enough to completely erase the memory of her unusual interest in Apache culture, and Mrs. Patterson's sharp intelligence has apparently connected that interest to the current crisis. The medicine matchich Joseph carries contains healing herbs that represent generations of Apache wisdom about the sacred relationship between human beings and the natural world. Sage for purification, sweetgrass for prayer, desert willow bark for pain relief, and dozens of other plants whose properties have been carefully observed and preserved through oral tradition. As a respected medicine man among his people, Joseph serves as keeper of knowledge that white civilization dismisses as primitive superstition while destroying the very ecosystem that makes such healing possible. But Joseph's true mission in approaching Mesa Ridge extends far beyond personal reunion with the woman he loves. Hidden within the medicine pouch, wrapped in soft deerskin and blessed with sacred smoke, lies a peace proposal carefully crafted by the Council of Apache elders, who understand that their people face extinction unless some accommodation can be reached with territorial authorities. The document outlines specific terms for avoiding the warfare that Captain Morrison seems determined to provoke. Designated travel corridors for Apache families moving between traditional seasonal camps, recognition of sacred sites that must remain undisturbed by white settlement, and establishment of trading relationships that benefit both communities without compromising Apache independence. Joseph's grandfather had charged him with this mission because his education in white schools provided him with the language and cultural understanding necessary to communicate Apache concerns in terms that territorial officials might comprehend. The old medicine man recognized that traditional Apache diplomacy, based on honor and spiritual wisdom, meant nothing to men who measured success in terms of land acquisition and military dominance. "You walk between worlds, grandson," the old man had said during Joseph's final visit to the mountain stronghold, where free Apache bands still maintained their ancient way of life. "The spirits have given you the gift of speaking both languages, understanding both customs. Perhaps you can build a bridge where others see only a battlefield." The peace proposal represents the last hope of Apache leaders who understand that continued conflict will result in the complete destruction of their people. Military technology and numerical superiority give territorial forces overwhelming advantages in any direct confrontation. Only through negotiation and compromise can Apache culture survive the coming transformation of the Southwest. But Joseph's personal mission complicates his diplomatic role in ways that threaten both objectives. His love for Elizabeth represents a vulnerability that enemies could exploit, while his Apache identity makes him a target for military action regardless of his peaceful intentions. The medicine pouch contains the healing herbs of his calling and the dangerous hope of preventing genocide through understanding. The morning sun climbs higher over Mesa Ridge as Joseph observes the settlement from his concealed position in the foothills. Through field glasses acquired during his time at Carlisle, he watches the increased military activity that Captain Morrison's arrival has generated. Patrols move through the surrounding terrain with systematic precision, their search patterns designed to locate and eliminate any Apache presence in the area. Joseph counts 12 soldiers in Morrison's command, enough firepower to overwhelm any small Apache band, but insufficient for coordinated resistance from multiple groups. The captain's strategy appears focused on eliminating individual leaders rather than engaging in large-scale warfare, a tactical approach that makes Joseph's presence particularly dangerous to his own safety. The irony of his situation weighs heavily on Joseph's mind. His education in white institutions was supposed to prepare him for leadership in a changing world, to help his people adapt and survive the inevitable transformation of their homeland. But that same education has made him a target for military commanders who view educated Apache people as particularly dangerous threats to white supremacy. From his hidden vantage point, Joseph can see Elizabeth moving through her daily routines in the schoolhouse below. Even at a distance, he recognizes the careful precision of her movements, the way she maintains perfect posture and measured behavior that marks her as a woman under constant observation. The sight of her fills him with both joy and anguish, knowing that his presence has introduced deadly risk into the safe life she has worked so hard to build. The medicine pouch weighs against his side like a constant reminder that his personal desires must serve larger purposes. The healing herbs connect him to his role as spiritual leader, while the peace proposal represents his people's desperate hope for survival. Elizabeth's love remains the most precious gift his life has known, but pursuing that love could destroy everything he has been trained to protect. Standing in the desert morning with the sun warming his face and the wind carrying the scent of sage and distant water, Joseph offers prayers to the spirits that guide all Apache decisions. The medicine pouch contains both healing and hope, but wisdom demands understanding the difference between what the heart wants and what duty requires. The council pipe rests in Joseph's weathered hands like a sacred trust passed down through generations of Apache leaders who understood that true authority comes from serving the people rather than ruling them. The silver inlay work catches the firelight as he sits with the gathered elders in a hidden canyon 20 miles from Mesa Ridge, the ornate craftsmanship representing the sophisticated artistry that white civilization refuses to acknowledge in Apache culture. 6 tribal leaders have gathered for this crucial meeting, their faces bearing the accumulated wisdom of lifetimes spent navigating the treacherous waters between tradition and survival. Each man carries the weight of decisions that will determine whether their children grow up free or confined to the spiritual death of reservation life. The soldier captain grows more aggressive with each passing day, reports Windwalker, whose band has been pushed steadily eastward by military patrols and territorial expansion. His men shoot first and ask questions later, treating every Apache as a hostile warrior regardless of age or intentions. Joseph nods with grim understanding, having observed Morrison's tactics during his reconnaissance around Mesa Ridge. The captain's approach differs significantly from his predecessor's calculated cruelty, relying instead on overwhelming force and intimidation to achieve territorial objectives. The peace proposal offers our best hope for preventing total war, Joseph says, his voice carrying the authority earned through years of successful negotiations with white officials. But approaching territorial headquarters requires careful timing and absolute certainty about our terms. Yellow Hawk, the eldest of the assembled leaders, speaks with the measured cadence of someone who has witnessed decades of broken promises and betrayed trusts. The white man's peace has always meant our surrender. Grants, their treaties are written on paper that burns, while our agreements are carved in stone and stars. How can we trust words from people who worship gold more than the sacred earth? The question strikes at the heart of Joseph's internal struggle between hope and experience. Every previous attempt at peaceful coexistence has resulted in further Apache losses, reduced territory, and increased restrictions on traditional ways of life. Yet the alternative appears to be complete annihilation through military action. Because the alternative is the death of our people, Joseph replies honestly, Morrison has authorization to use any means necessary to clear this territory of Apache presence. If we cannot find some basis for coexistence, our children will know only the reservation or the grave. The council pipe passes from hand to hand as each leader speaks his thoughts about the desperate gamble that Joseph's mission represents. The sacred tobacco burns slowly, its smoke carrying their words to the spirit world, where ancestors watch and judge the decisions of the living. Stormcloud, whose band includes many of the survivors from Captain Stewart's brutal raid 3 years earlier, speaks with barely controlled anger about the futility of negotiating with people who view Apache humanity as an obstacle to progress. They see us as animals to be hunted or tamed, never as brothers sharing the same earth beneath the same sky, he says, his scarred hands gripping the pipe with intensity that reflects his bitter experience. What peace can exist between wolves and sheep when the wolves refuse to acknowledge that sheep have souls? Joseph understands Stormcloud's anger because he shares it, but his education in white institutions has also shown him glimpses of individuals capable of seeing beyond racial prejudice to recognize common humanity. Elizabeth represents proof that such people exist, that love can transcend the artificial boundaries that divide cultures and races. There are white people of good heart, Joseph says carefully, knowing that his personal experience colors his judgment in ways that might compromise his objectivity. Not all of them support the policies that are destroying our homeland. Good hearts mean nothing when bad policies carry guns, responds Swift Arrow, the youngest of the assembled leaders. The kind white teacher may weep for our suffering, but she still benefits from the land taken from our children. Individual conscience cannot overcome collective greed. The observation cuts deeply because Joseph knows that Elizabeth's position in Mesa Ridge depends entirely on the displacement of Apache people from their traditional territory. Her schoolhouse stands on land where Apache children once played. Her salary comes from taxes levied on Apache territory, claimed through military conquest. As the council pipe completes its circuit, Joseph realizes that his fellow leaders are asking him to accomplish the impossible, negotiate a peace agreement with people who profit from Apache destruction while maintaining his credibility as a defender of Apache interests. The silver-inlaid pipe represents not just ceremonial authority, but the crushing weight of impossible expectations. I will approach the territorial governor's office within the week, Joseph announces, his decision carrying the finality of spiritual commitment. The terms we have discussed represent the minimum requirements for Apache survival. If they are rejected, we will at least face our fate, knowing that we exhausted every possibility for peace. The elders nod with solemn acceptance, understanding that Joseph's mission represents their people's last hope for avoiding a war they cannot win. The council pipe will return to its sacred keeping place, while Joseph carries their collective trust into negotiations that could preserve Apache culture or witness its final destruction. As the gathering disperses in the pre-dawn darkness, each leader returning to his scattered band with news of the desperate gamble ahead, Joseph reflects on the irony of his position. The same education that qualifies him to speak for his people in white councils also makes him a target for military action designed to eliminate Apache leadership. His love for Elizabeth complicates his mission while his mission threatens her safety. Elizabeth stares at her reflection in the silver mirror, watching hairline cracks spread across the surface like a spider's web that fragments her image into broken pieces. The mirror had belonged to her mother, a wedding gift that traveled west with the family's dreams of prosperity and new beginnings. Now the fractured glass seems to mock her attempts to maintain a unified identity, showing instead the shattered fragments of a woman torn between incompatible worlds. The crack had appeared yesterday morning, a thin line running diagonally across the surface that she first attributed to the desert heat and the dry air that warps wood and splits metal with relentless persistence. But as she prepared for bed last night, the crack had suddenly expanded into a complex web that turned her reflection into a puzzle of disconnected pieces. Apache beliefs about broken mirrors carry spiritual significance that Elizabeth learned during her time with Joseph's people. Fragmented reflections represent souls divided against themselves, internal conflicts that manifest in the physical world as warnings from the spirit realm. The timing of the mirror's destruction, coinciding with Joseph's reappearance and Captain Morrison's threats, seems too deliberate to be mere coincidence. A sharp knock at her door interrupts Elizabeth's troubled contemplation. Captain Morrison stands on her threshold with the rigid posture of military authority, his cold eyes scanning her modest quarters with the practiced assessment of someone trained to identify threats and weaknesses. "Miss Hartwell, I understand you've been teaching local children about Apache customs and history as part of their education." Morrison begins without preamble, his tone suggesting that such pedagogical choices constitute evidence of dangerous sympathies. Elizabeth forces herself to meet his gaze with the calm dignity that has served her well in previous confrontations with suspicious officials. "Education requires understanding different perspectives, Cap. The children who live in this territory benefit from learning about all the cultures that share this land." "That's an interesting philosophy," Morrison replies, stepping uninvited into her quarters and examining the books and teaching materials that line her shelves. "In my experience, sympathetic education about savage customs often indicates divided loyalties among supposedly civilized people. The accusation hangs between them like a drawn sword, its implications clear despite the indirect language Morrison employs. Elizabeth recognizes the interrogation technique from her encounter with Captain Stewart 3 years earlier. Establish suspicion through seemingly casual conversation before moving to direct accusations and ultimatums. "I serve this community by preparing its children to understand the world they inhabit." Elizabeth responds carefully. "Knowledge promotes peaceful coexistence, while ignorance breeds the kind of fear and hatred that leads to unnecessary violence." Morrison's laugh carries no humor, only the bitter satisfaction of someone who believes he has confirmed his suspicions. "Peaceful coexistence with Apache raiders, Miss Hartwell. An admirable sentiment from someone whose position depends entirely on the protection of military force." The captain moves closer, his presence filling Elizabeth's small quarters with the threat of official authority and personal menace. "I've been reviewing reports from your previous teaching position. Captain Stewart noted some irregularities in your behavior before your departure. Concerns about your excessive interest in Apache affairs." Elizabeth's blood runs cold as she realizes that Morrison has conducted a thorough investigation into her background. that the carefully constructed fiction of her reputation may be unraveling under military scrutiny. The broken mirror behind her reflects the captain's image in fragmented pieces that seem to multiply his threatening presence. "I don't understand your implications, Captain," Elizabeth says, though her voice betrays the fear that his words have awakened. "I left my previous position to accept better opportunities here in Mesa Ridge. There were no irregularities in my conduct." "Perhaps not," Morrison concedes with a thin smile that never reaches his eyes. "But current circumstances require extra vigilance about anyone whose sympathies might be divided. The Apache warrior we're hunting is particularly dangerous because he's been educated in white schools, trained to manipulate civilized people through false appeals to Christian charity and misguided notions of universal brotherhood." The description fits Joseph perfectly, and Elizabeth realizes that Morrison's investigation has been more thorough than she initially understood. The captain knows about Joseph's education at Carlisle, about his role as a cultural intermediary, perhaps even about his diplomatic mission to prevent warfare. "This particular Apache has been observed in the vicinity of Mesa Ridge," Morrison continues, watching Elizabeth's face for any reaction that might confirm his suspicions. "Intelligence suggests he may be attempting to contact sympathizers within the white community, people who might provide information or assistance for future raids." Elizabeth struggles to maintain her composure while Morrison's words strike at her worst fear. If the captain suspects her previous relationship with Joseph, her position in Mesa Ridge becomes untenable. But if he doesn't yet have definitive proof, perhaps careful behavior might still preserve her secret and protect Joseph from immediate danger. "Captain, I assure you that my loyalty lies entirely with this community and its protection," Elizabeth says with as much conviction as she can manage. "If I observe anything suspicious, you will be the first to know." Morrison studies her face with the calculating assessment of a professional interrogator, searching for signs of deception or divided loyalty. The broken mirror behind Elizabeth continues to fragment her reflection, creating multiple images that seem to mock her attempts to present a unified, trustworthy appearance. "I hope that's true, Miss Hartwell," Morrison says finally, "because the consequences of misplaced sympathy in Apache affairs tend to be permanent and irreversible." Good. After Morrison's departure, Elizabeth collapses into her chair and stares at the spider web of cracks that has transformed her mother's mirror into a map of her own fractured identity. The reflection that once showed a unified, respectable schoolmistress now reveals the truth she has tried so desperately to hide. A woman torn between love and duty, between authenticity and survival, between the competing demands of two incompatible worlds. Terror drives Elizabeth from her quarters that night with reckless abandon. Morrison's threats echoing in her mind like warning bells that drown out every rational argument for caution. The star map drawn on deerskin that Joseph had once shown her provides navigation through the darkness, its constellation patterns marking the path to freedom that Apache people have followed for countless generations when white civilization pressed too close to their sacred places. The deerskin chart represents knowledge that transcends formal education, wisdom accumulated through centuries of survival in harsh terrain, where mistakes cost lives, and accurate navigation means the difference between freedom and captivity. Joseph had traced the star patterns with his finger while explaining how Apache travelers read the night sky like a book written by the Creator himself. "Every star tells a story of direction and distance," he had whispered during one of their secret meetings, his breath warm against her ear as they lay beneath the vast desert sky. But the most important navigation comes from understanding that true direction flows from the heart, not from charts drawn by other hands. Now Elizabeth follows that celestial guidance through terrain that grows increasingly dangerous with each mile traveled away from the settlement. Morrison's patrols have established a network of checkpoints and observation posts designed to detect any Apache movement in the area, their systematic coverage, leaving few gaps for safe passage. The sound of approaching horses forces Elizabeth to take shelter behind a cluster of barrel cacti, their spines creating natural armor that conceals her presence while military riders pass within yards of her hiding place. Through gaps in the vegetation, she can see the tension in their posture, the way their hands rest near their weapons as they scan the landscape for signs of Apache activity. Joseph waits at their predetermined meeting place with the patient stillness of a hunter who understands that movement draws attention, while silence provides safety. His own journey to reach the hidden canyon has required skills learned during childhood games that prepared Apache boys for lives of constant alertness. Every sense remains attuned to potential danger while his heart races with anticipation of seeing Elizabeth again. The reunion, when it finally comes, carries the desperate intensity of two people who understand they may be meeting for the last time. Elizabeth throws herself into Joseph's arms with abandonment that sweeps away 3 years of careful restraint, her tears falling like desert rain on drought-stricken earth. Morrison knows, she gasps between sobs, her words muffled against Joseph's chest. He's investigated my past, questioned my loyalty, threatened consequences for anyone showing Apache sympathies. We have to leave tonight, before his patrols find us here. Joseph holds her with fierce tenderness, while his mind races through the implications of her revelation. Morrison's investigation represents a level of official suspicion that makes continued contact impossible without exposing them both to immediate danger. Yet the peace mission he carries for his people requires him to remain in the territory long enough to approach territorial authorities. "Elizabeth, I cannot leave yet," he says softly, his words carrying the weight of duty that transcends personal desire. "I carry terms for peace that could save my people from destruction. If I flee now, that opportunity dies with our personal safety." The deerskin star map spread between them shows multiple routes away from the territory, paths that could carry them beyond the reach of Morrison's authority to places where their love might exist without persecution. But following those routes would mean abandoning Joseph's mission and accepting the destruction of Apache culture in exchange for personal happiness. Elizabeth traces the constellation patterns with her finger, each star representing a choice point where different futures become possible. The map offers freedom, but at a price that their consciences may not be able to bear. "Your people trusted you with their survival," she whispers, understanding the impossible position that duty has created. "I cannot ask you to choose me over them, but I cannot survive watching you walk into Morrison's trap." Joseph takes her face in his hands, looking into her eyes with infinite love and terrible resolve. "Then we must find a third path, one that serves both love and duty." The star map shows many directions, but wisdom lies in choosing the route that honors all our obligations. The sound of approaching cavalry grows louder as the final confrontation draws near, but Elizabeth and Joseph face it together with the spiritual strength that comes from choosing authenticity over safety, love over fear, and hope over despair. The school bell that has called Mesa Ridge children to learning for over a decade now carries Apache blessing beads woven through its bronze surface, their turquoise and silver colors catching the morning light like captured pieces of sky and earth. Elizabeth had added the sacred ornaments during her final night as schoolmistress, honoring both the education she provided and the spiritual wisdom she gained through her love for Joseph. The beads represent a transformation that extends far beyond personal revelation to encompass Elizabeth's understanding of what true education should accomplish. Her 3 years of teaching in Mesa Ridge had focused on preparing children for success in white civilization, but her reunion with Joseph has shown her the limitations of education that ignores indigenous wisdom and cultural contributions. Captain Morrison's forces surround the Sacred Valley with overwhelming strength, but Dr. Samuel Hayes rides with them carrying medical supplies and a desperate hope that bloodshed might still be avoided. His presence among the military forces represents the moral complexity that good people face when institutional authority conflicts with personal conscience. Captain Morrison, I request permission to approach under medical flag. Hayes calls across the canyon, his voice carrying the authority earned through years of service to the territorial community. If there are wounded individuals in that valley, I am bound by oath to provide treatment regardless of their tribal affiliation. Morrison's response reveals the depth of his prejudice and his determination to resolve the situation through violence rather than negotiation. Doctor, your medical oath does not extend to Apache raiders who threaten the safety of civilized communities. Any approach to that canyon will be considered an act of treason. But Dr. Hayes dismounts from his horse with quiet dignity, his medical bag in hand and his conscience clearly at war with military order. Captain, I have treated members of your command for injuries and illnesses without question about the justice of your cause. I will extend the same professional courtesy to anyone requiring medical attention, regardless of their race or tribal affiliation. Elizabeth watches from the canyon rim as the confrontation develops between Morrison's military authority and Dr. Hayes's moral conviction. The sight of Samuel Hayes risking his position and safety to uphold medical ethics fills her with profound gratitude and deep regret for the pain her choices have caused him. Samuel, please don't risk yourself for our sake. Elizabeth calls down to him, her voice carrying across the canyon with heartbreaking clarity. We knew the consequences of our choices. Hayes looks up toward her voice with obvious relief at discovering that she remains unharmed, but his expression also carries the hurt of a man who realizes that his romantic hopes have been built on incomplete understanding of the woman he thought he loved. Elizabeth, whatever has brought you to this place, you deserve the chance to explain your actions to people who know your character and value your contributions to our community, he says with gentle firmness. Captain Morrison, I formally request safe passage for Miss Hartwell to return to Mesa Ridge under medical protection. Morrison's refusal is immediate and absolute. The schoolmistress has made her choice to consort with Apache raiders. She will face the consequences of that choice along with her savage companion. Joseph emerges from cover with his hands visible but not raised in surrender, his bearing reflecting the dignity of a leader who refuses to be intimidated by superior force. The blessing beads on Elizabeth's school bell catch the light as wind stirs them into gentle movement, their soft chiming creating an almost musical counterpoint to the tension crackling between the opposing forces. Captain Morrison, I am Joseph Crow Feather, and I carry terms for peace from the Council of Apache Elders, Joseph announces, his voice projecting clearly across the canyon. I request safe conduct to present these terms to territorial authorities according to the laws governing diplomatic contact with indigenous peoples. Morrison's laughter carries no humor, only contempt for what he views as a transparent attempt to avoid justified punishment. There are no laws governing contact with savage raiders, only military orders for their elimination. You have 10 minutes to surrender unconditionally before I order my men to take this canyon by force. Elizabeth steps beside Joseph, her decision crystallizing with absolute clarity despite the terror that fills her chest. The school bell with its Apache blessing beads represents the synthesis of two educational traditions, the possibility that knowledge and wisdom can flow in both directions across cultural boundaries. Captain Morrison, I am Elizabeth Hartwell and I stand with my husband in requesting safe conduct for diplomatic purposes, she announces, using her voice as a weapon of truth that cuts through the lies and pretenses that have defined her life in Mesa Ridge. The word husband strikes the assembled soldiers like a thunderbolt, confirming Morrison's worst suspicions while exposing Elizabeth to immediate consequences for her public acknowledgement of marriage to an Apache man. But the declaration also transforms the nature of the confrontation from simple military action to something that approaches international incident. Dr. Hayes steps forward with renewed urgency, his medical training overriding every other consideration. Captain, if Miss Hartwell claims marriage to this Apache individual, territorial law requires formal investigation rather than summary military action. You cannot simply execute civilians without due process. Morrison's face flushes with anger at having his authority questioned by a civilian, But Dr. Hayes's legal knowledge creates complications that the captain cannot simply ignore. Territorial governance operates under federal oversight that requires some adherence to legal procedures, particularly in cases involving white citizens. "Very well," Morrison snarls after a long moment of calculation. "Mr. and Crowfeather will be taken into custody pending investigation of their claims and their potential involvement in Apache raids against territorial settlements. Doctor, you may examine them for injuries after they surrender their weapons and submit to military detention." The offer represents a temporary victory but not safety. Military detention often proved fatal for Apache prisoners, and Elizabeth's status as Joseph's wife provides no protection against charges of treason and moral corruption. Joseph and Elizabeth exchange looks that carry 3 years of separation, a night of reunion, and the understanding that they face their future together regardless of what that future might bring. The school bell continues its gentle chiming as wind stirs the blessing beads, creating a sound that bridges their separate worlds through the universal language of love. Sustained by courage. "We surrender to your authority," Joseph announces, "but we do not surrender our right to be heard or our commitment to seeking peace through understanding rather than violence." As Morrison's soldiers move into the canyon to take them into custody, Elizabeth touches the school bell one final time, letting her fingers trace the Apache blessing beads that represent the education she has truly received during her years in the territory. The artifact will remain in the sacred valley as a symbol of her transformation from fearful teacher to courageous advocate for justice that transcends racial boundaries. The wedding blanket spreads across the ground before the territorial governor's emergency tribunal, with intricate patterns that blend Apache geometric designs with Anglo-textile traditions, its mixed cultural elements creating something entirely new while honoring both heritage streams. Elizabeth and Joseph sit side by side on the ceremonial covering, while territorial officials debate their fate and the larger questions their relationship raises about law, culture, and human rights. Governor William Harrison Pierce examines the documents that Dr. Hayes has presented in support of Elizabeth and Joseph's legal position. Marriage certificates from both Apache traditional ceremony and a subsequent civil ceremony performed by a sympathetic minister in a distant territorial settlement. Testimony from respected territorial citizens about Elizabeth's character and Joseph's peaceful intentions, and the original peace proposal that Captain Morrison rejected without consideration. "This is highly irregular," Governor Pierce announces to the packed courtroom, where Mesa Ridge residents have gathered to witness the resolution of the scandal that has dominated local conversation for weeks. Territorial law recognizes marriages performed according to various religious traditions, but the question remains whether Apache ceremonial practices constitute legitimate religious expression under federal authority. The wedding blanket beneath them carries profound symbolic weight for both cultures it represents. Apache women spent months creating the geometric patterns that tell stories of spiritual connection and eternal commitment, while Anglo-textile workers contributed the wool and weaving techniques that give the blanket its remarkable durability. The fusion of traditions creates something stronger and more beautiful than either culture could produce independently. Mrs. Patterson rises from her seat in the gallery with obvious agitation, her voice sharp with moral outrage that reflects the feelings of many territorial residents. Governor Pierce allowing this shameful union to receive legal recognition would encourage other white women to corrupt themselves with savage influences. The moral foundations of civilized society depend on maintaining proper boundaries between races. But Tom Bradley stands to speak for Elizabeth's defenders, his weathered face reflecting years of practical experience with both Apache and Anglo neighbors. "Governor Miss Hartwell taught our children with dedication and skill that earned universal respect," If her marriage to this Apache man represents moral corruption, then perhaps our definition of morality needs examination. Joseph requests permission to address the tribunal directly, his formal education providing him with knowledge of legal procedures and rhetorical techniques that territorial officials cannot simply dismiss. Governor Pierce, the peace proposal I carried from Apache elders, offers specific terms for avoiding the warfare that Captain Morrison's policies seem designed to provoke. I respectfully request that this tribunal consider those terms as evidence of Apache desire for lawful coexistence. The peace proposal contains detailed provisions for shared land use, regulated trade relationships, and dispute resolution mechanisms that could serve both communities if implemented with good faith on both sides. Joseph's articulate presentation of these terms demonstrates the sophisticated political thinking that Apache leaders have developed in response to territorial expansion. Captain Morrison objects strenuously to allowing Joseph any platform for presenting Apache political positions. Governor, this tribunal should focus on criminal charges against 2 individuals who have violated territorial law and social order. Apache political demands have no relevance to legal proceedings concerning treason and moral corruption. But Governor Pierce recognizes the larger implications of the case that extends far beyond the personal choices of Elizabeth and Joseph. Territorial governance requires some accommodation with indigenous peoples, and total warfare would be both costly and politically unpopular with federal authorities who prefer negotiated solutions to expensive military campaigns. Hayes presents his medical testimony with scientific objectivity that cuts through emotional rhetoric and racial prejudice. Governor, my examination of both individuals reveals no evidence of coercion, mental incapacity, or physical abuse that might invalidate their consent to marriage. Crowfeather demonstrates clear understanding of her choices and their consequences. The formal use of Elizabeth's married name in official proceedings represents a crucial victory in the battle for recognition of their relationship. Each acknowledgement of her status as Joseph's wife establishes legal precedent that supports their position while undermining arguments for annulment based on cultural differences. Elizabeth rises to speak in her own defense, her voice carrying the authority earned through years of educational service and moral leadership within the territorial community. Governor Pierce, my marriage to Joseph Crowfeather represents not betrayal of white civilization, but expansion of its moral boundaries to include recognition of indigenous rights and human dignity. Her testimony continues for nearly an hour as she describes the spiritual wisdom she has gained through exposure to Apache cultural traditions, the educational value of cross-cultural understanding, and her vision of a territorial future where different peoples coexist through mutual respect rather than military domination. The wedding blanket beneath them seems to pulse with symbolic energy as Elizabeth speaks, its mixed cultural patterns reflecting the synthesis of traditions that their marriage represents. Several territorial officials shift uncomfortably as her eloquent defense challenges assumptions they have never previously examined. Governor Pierce announces his decision after nearly 4 hours of testimony and deliberation. This tribunal recognizes the marriage of Elizabeth Hartwell Crowfeather and Joseph Crowfeather as legally valid under territorial authority. However, this recognition comes with conditions designed to serve both individual rights and community welfare. The conditions include Joseph's appointment as official cultural liaison between Apache peoples and territorial government, Elizabeth's establishment of a model school serving both Apache and Anglo children, and both individuals' commitment to promoting peaceful coexistence through education and cultural exchange. The wedding blanket will hang in their new schoolhouse as a symbol of the cultural bridge building that their love has made possible, its mixed patterns inspiring children from both communities to envision futures where difference creates strength rather than conflict. The ancient pottery shard lies half buried in the sand of the sacred valley, its geometric patterns still visible despite centuries of weathering and the passage of countless seasons. Elizabeth kneels beside the fragment while Joseph builds a small fire, both of them understanding that they have reached a place where the spirits of the ancestors remain strong enough to offer guidance for the impossible choices ahead. My grandfather's grandfather found pottery like this throughout these canyons, Joseph explains as flames begin to dance in the circle of stones he has carefully arranged. The patterns tell stories of people who loved across tribal boundaries, who found ways to honor both their hearts and their duties to the communities that shaped them. The geometric designs on the pottery fragments speak to artistic traditions that flourished in these canyons long before European explorers dreamed of westward expansion. Spirals represent the eternal nature of love. Interlocking circles show the connection between separate peoples, and the zigzag patterns trace the difficult path that true commitment requires through hostile territory. Elizabeth runs her fingers across the smooth clay surface, feeling the echo of hands that shaped this vessel generations ago. The pottery shard connects them to a deeper history of human experience, to ancestors who faced similar choices between personal desire and collective responsibility. The Apache have always understood that some places hold special power. Joseph continues, settling beside Elizabeth as the fire grows stronger. This valley has witnessed countless ceremonies, countless moments when the spirit world touched the physical realm to offer healing and guidance. As if responding to his words, the desert around them seems to pulse with invisible energy. Night sounds grow louder, the hunting cry of owls, the rustle of small creatures moving through sagebrush, the distant howl of coyotes calling to their pack. Elizabeth feels her consciousness expanding beyond the narrow boundaries of fear and social convention that have constrained her thinking for 3 years. Joseph begins the healing ceremony his grandfather taught him for mending wounds that cannot be seen but never stop bleeding. He sprinkles sacred herbs into the fire, their smoke rising in patterns that seem to carry prayers directly to the star-filled sky above. The ancient ritual requires both participants to speak truths they have hidden even from themselves. "I blamed myself for bringing danger into your life," Joseph says, his voice raw with emotion, held in check for too long. "My love for you exposed you to persecution from your own people, while my divided attention failed to protect my band from Stuart's raid." Elizabeth watches the smoke spiral upward, carrying Joseph's words into the realm where forgiveness becomes possible. "I blamed myself for not being strong enough to stay and fight for our love. Running away felt like cowardice, abandoning you when you needed support most." The ceremony continues through the night as they speak aloud the fears, regrets, and desperate hopes that have shaped their separate journeys through 3 years of painful separation. Joseph shares the isolation of serving as intermediary between worlds that view him with suspicion, while Elizabeth describes the spiritual death of living a life that denies the deepest truth of her heart. As dawn approaches, their voices grow quieter but more intense, their confessions becoming prayers for strength to face whatever challenges await them. The fire burns lower but maintains enough warmth to keep the desert chill at bay, while they hold each other with the desperate tenderness of lovers who have learned how precious and fragile happiness can be. The pottery tells us that love like ours has existed before, Joseph whispers as the first light touches the canyon walls. Other couples have faced similar choices and found ways to honor both personal commitment and larger responsibility. Elizabeth studies the geometric patterns on the ancient shard, searching for wisdom that might illuminate their path forward. The spirals seem to suggest that apparent contradictions can be resolved through understanding the deeper connections that unite all living things. "What if our love could serve your people's cause?" she asks suddenly, an idea forming in her mind with the clarity that sometimes emerges from desperate circumstances. "What if my position in Mesa Ridge could provide the access you need to deliver your peace proposal?" Joseph considers her suggestion with the careful attention he gives to all matters of spiritual importance. The possibility had not occurred to him because it would require Elizabeth to risk everything she has built, while trusting that their combined efforts might succeed where his individual mission would likely fail. "Morrison suspects you already," Joseph points. Using your position to help me would confirm his worst assumptions about your loyalty. But he doesn't have proof yet, Elizabeth replies, her mind racing with possibilities she hadn't previously considered. If we're careful, if we plan properly, your peace proposal might reach territorial authorities before Morrison can act on his suspicion. The ancient pottery shard seems to pulse with warmth in Elizabeth's palm as she speaks, as though the spirits of the ancestors approve of solutions that serve love and duty simultaneously. The geometric patterns catch the firelight like a message written in symbols older than written language. Joseph pulls Elizabeth closer, both of them understanding that they have found the third path that seemed impossible just hours earlier. Their love will not require abandoning responsibility to their peoples, but rather will become the instrument through which larger healing might occur. The spirits brought us together in this sacred place to show us that personal happiness and collective good need not be enemies. Joseph says with growing conviction, our marriage can become a bridge between worlds rather than a threat to both. As morning light fills the canyon, Elizabeth and Joseph begin planning their return to Mesa Ridge, not as fugitives fleeing impossible circumstances, but as partners committed to transforming those circumstances through courage and strategic action. The pottery shard will remain in the sacred valley as an offering to the ancestors, while its message of hope and possibility travels with them into an uncertain but no longer hopeless future. The peace treaty draft lies crumpled and torn on Captain Morrison's field desk, its carefully worded proposals for coexistence reduced to worthless paper by the military commander's absolute refusal to consider any accommodation with Apache interests. Joseph had approached the territorial outpost under a flag of truce, hoping that his education and diplomatic credentials might open channels for meaningful negotiation. Morrison's response had been swift and decisive. Arrest warrants for Joseph and any Apache leaders associated with the peace proposal, military authorization for preemptive strikes against any bands refusing immediate relocation to designated reservations, and deployment of additional cavalry units to ensure complete territorial compliance with government policy. Your people have 1 week to surrender unconditionally, Morrison had declared, his words carrying the finality of military ultimatum. Any Apache found in this territory after that deadline will be considered hostile combatants and dealt with accordingly. The torn edges of the peace treaty document tell the story of Elizabeth and Joseph's desperate attempt to prevent the very conflict that Morrison seems determined to provoke. Elizabeth had used her position as schoolmistress to arrange the meeting, presenting Joseph as an educational consultant interested in developing cultural exchange programs between Apache and white communities. The deception had worked long enough to get Joseph into Morrison's presence, but the captain's suspicions about Elizabeth's motives had colored his reception of the peace proposal from the beginning. Her advocacy for Apache interests confirmed his worst assumptions about her loyalty, while Joseph's articulate presentation of diplomatic terms only reinforced Morrison's belief that educated Apache people posed particular threats to white supremacy. Now the sacred valley where they had found spiritual healing becomes their fortress as Morrison's forces close in from multiple directions. The ancient petroglyphs on the canyon walls seem to watch over them like protective spirits, while reality narrows to the immediate challenge of survival. Your position in Mesa Ridge is compromised beyond repair, Joseph says as they watch dust clouds marking the approach of military patrols from 3 separate directions. Morrison will use your connection to me as evidence of treason, regardless of your motives for helping arrange the meeting. Elizabeth nods with calm acceptance of the consequences their choice has created. The respectability she worked 3 years to build has been destroyed in a single morning, but the loss feels strangely liberating rather than devastating. The facade of propriety had always been a prison that kept her from her authentic self. Dr. Hayes was right about one thing, she says with bitter irony. This territory does need someone who understands both cultures, but Morrison will never allow such understanding to develop peacefully. Joseph examines the terrain around their position with the tactical assessment that his military education has taught him to apply to dangerous situations. The canyon offers excellent defensive advantages, but limited escape routes if they become surrounded by superior forces. My grandfather chose this place for the marriage ceremony because the spirits here are strong enough to protect true love, Joseph says with quiet confidence. But spiritual protection works through human courage and wisdom, not through miraculous intervention. The approaching dust clouds grow larger as Morrison's search pattern tightens around their position. Elizabeth can hear the distant sound of horses and shouted commands as the dragnet closes with military precision and overwhelming force. Whatever happens, Elizabeth says, taking Joseph's hand with fierce determination, I choose you. I choose the truth of our love over the safety of lies. If we die here, we die as we lived in our hearts, united despite every force trying to divide us. Joseph lifts the torn peace treaty from the ground, its damaged pages fluttering in the desert wind like broken promises and shattered hopes. Then we make our stand here, in this sacred place, where our love was blessed by the ancestors. If Morrison wants war instead of peace, he will have to come through us to get it. The sound of approaching cavalry grows louder as the final confrontation draws near, but Elizabeth and Joseph face it together with the spiritual strength that comes from choosing authenticity over safety, love over fear, and hope over despair.